Hoch thought he was only running away from Amelia Fisher. But thanks to the media, he'll soon be running away from the law. This is Tomb Snoopers. All right, you got Tomb Snoopers back. Sorry, I've been away for a week. I was off trampling around the UK, as one does, you know. Mm-hmm. You find more serial killer content if you go to Edinburgh than if you go to Glasgow. It's really, it's kind of like, well, it's an interesting thing. A lot of people who go to Glasgow think it's like the Chicago of Scotland, which it's got that kind of a feel to it.
Grittiness feel to it.
That kind of a grittiness feel to it. I did see an ad for hot dogs there that was what just showed a picture of a hot dog slathered entirely in ketchup for £4.50, which is like $7 for a ketchup slathered hot dog. That ain't Chicago. Edinburgh is much more into their criminal history in a way that Chicago kind of is too. It's they go a lot more into, you know, they have a bar called The Last Drop where people supposedly went before they were hanged. They've got a place marked where people used to be hanged. They've got a strip club named after Burke and Hare, the murderers.
Wow. I missed this when I was there.
It's similar to the way Chicago kind of leans into our gangster stuff and
Right.
H.H. Holmes and all of our criminal history. In any case, I trampled around for about a week or so, and now we are back to Tomb Snoopers. How you doing, Patty?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to our latest tales of this incredible case.
So
good.
It's almost a break this week because during for most of the action here, Hoch is missing. Now, really, we've just been chronicling Hoch as he goes around the country, marrying people and occasionally killing them. And in this case, he is just married. We'll recap a little bit. It's been a couple of weeks. Late 1904, he marries a woman by the name of Maria Walker. She dies about 5 weeks later of apparent kidney disorder. And the way the story comes out is while the body is still on the slab, Hoch proposes to her sister Emily, and Emily says yes. Now, Emily, once again to recap, absolutely hated Marie's guts. Hoch got them to shake hands and be friends a little bit, but in any case, Hoch marries Emily the day after Marie is buried, and then the next day he takes all of her money and disappears. So that's where we have ended at this point. And this is the kind of thing he had done a lot of times. The sister switcheroo seems like a remarkably bold feat.
Yeah.
I mean, even if this is actually the way it went down, and I've never been convinced. There were various hints off and on during the case that don't really get written in now that Emily might have just been in on the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Which it seems a little bit more likely to me that she must have been in on the plans. Like, well, if we get rid of your sister, I'll marry you. Or if she dies, I'll marry you. They have to have figured this out in advance somehow.
And she never thought that she would be the one that would also
Right.
be the prey.
Yeah, you know, if somebody talks you into committing a crime to get something, they're probably going to commit one on you next. And she should have probably seen that he knew what he was doing. But there was...
You mean there's no code of honor in situations like this?
Well, you know, there's been at least that one time when the person he was trying to swindle thought she was swindling him. And that probably happened more than once, really. But, so... this is the kind of thing he's pulled off several times. He just goes off to another city and probably figures that's it. In this case, though, there's kind of a new game in town. Certainly a new game since last time he had killed anybody in Chicago, almost a decade back now. So... what we got to get into now is the newspapers. The newspapers ended up playing a hugely outsized role in this case, partly because they really shaped the story, and partly this was just a story built for them. They loved talking about hypnosis in newspapers back then. It comes up all the time. They loved serial killer stories. Those always sold things. This just gave them a chance to make up any rumor they wanted to. But then when we say it like that, it sounds like the papers were just exaggerating and making things up right and left, which is kind of our view of newspapers of that era, the days of yellow journalism now. And really, I find that newspapers are better sources than people give them credit for. So...
Good for us.
Yeah. I mean, these reporters, it's hard to say that one paper was less reliable than the other. The reporters all hopped around from paper to paper.
Sure.
So We'll go back a few years before. Chicago already had its sensationalistic papers. It had already had its papers that got a little outlandish. The Daily Inter-Ocean was a paper that generally advertised towards kind of an upmarket audience. They were very well written. It was kind of a literary paper, well illustrated. But in the late 19th century, they got bought up by the guy who owned all the streetcar tracks. Oh. And he just kind of used the whole paper as his mouthpiece to say that if we elect the mayor who has opposed me, he's going to let every thief and every criminal. I think one paper actually said the gypsies, tramps, and thieves. It's like a whole Cher song worth of no good nicks. A lot of them are terms that we don't use anymore. For a while, he was every day running a list of all the associates of Mayor Harrison's re-election campaign, who was named the Medicine Kid, Tommy the Clock. And I just kind of imagine a couple of reporters getting to spend a whole afternoon making up gambler nicknames. And probably figured, nobody's going to actually believe this stuff anyway. Everybody knows who owns this paper. But by the time of Johann Hoch, he was the traction king was long gone, and it was really back to being more of an above board, middle brow to highbrow newspaper. There's also the Chicago Journal, which had kind of slunk into its corner. As the late 19th century, 1897, they were the wildest of the papers. They were the one covering all the murders, all of the sensational stories. There's a famous example in particular that during the trial of Adolf Lutgert. Adolf Lutgert was the sausage king of Chicago. Back
really?
Yeah, back before Abe Froman took over. And he murdered his wife at one point. And as a tour guide, this is a really difficult story to tell, because you mentioned sausage and murder right at the beginning.
Oh, God.
Anything where a person doesn't get eaten is going to be anticlimactic. And there's nothing really to suggest that Louisa Lutgert, his wife, would have been ground up into sausage. Her body was boiled down in a sausage curing pit. Just like any other Tuesday. Oh. So, it was kind of a landmark case. They used forensics to prove that the bone fragments they found were actually human, and that was pretty new. But in the middle after the trial, when the jury was still deliberating, the jury came out and found that the evening papers were publishing all the things they had said in the jury room. Which, of course, was a closed and locked proceeding, but it was nobody denied that, no, this is actually what we're saying. And about a week later, after the verdict, the Chicago Journal announced, here's how we did it, is we had a person snooping by lowering him down an air shaft next to the jury room. They even had a diagram of this. And this isn't something that came out years and years later. They bragged about it days after it happened. Legal jurisprudence just was not quite what it is now.
Right, they weren't going to track them down.
And, nowadays, I'm sure they could have gotten a new trial for the guy just based on that.
Yeah.
But back then, there's a lot of things that go on in trials at the time that I think they should have gotten a new trial over. That happens all the time back then. But the Journal, they'd kind of slunk away from that kind of stuff because the market was now cornered. In 1900, William Randolph Hearst opened his first Chicago paper. That was the Chicago American. There's a story going that when he first decided, I've got a paper in San Francisco, I've got this paper in New York, we should probably have one in the middle because my paper's really pushing William Jennings Bryan for president. If we had a paper in the Midwest, we could increase his chances there. So why don't we get a paper up and going? We'll call it the Chicago American. And his distribution manager, one guy like that said, that's a tough town. You're going to have to shoot your way in.
Oh, wow.
And Hearst said, take all the ammo you need. And both of these guys were being entirely literal about this.
What?
There was a thing going on, the circulation wars, where newsies would be hired to knock over other newsstands, to make sure that this given paper had prominent placement on the busy street corners, to make sure that other papers were a little bit harder to find back behind the counter. And people got killed over stuff like this. These what they called them newspaper sluggers. They became kind of like the minor league baseball team for the mob. This was a little bit before organized crime really took off the way it was, but a lot of these guys would graduate to being like safe crackers and bank robbers and racketeers. And then eventually guys like Spike O'Donnell, Dino Banyan, all these guys, all these like big Chicago mobsters of the 20s got their start in the newspaper slugger game.
I don't think I've ever been aware of that. I mean, 'cause I know that there was like a cab war.
There were wars like all of these things. Even now, like the Garbage Families, I know are will have like a long history. But yeah, it's not that well documented because the main source that would document it would be newspapers, and most of the data comes from papers that couldn't afford their newspaper sluggers would publish exposés of the papers that could. But
nobody cared. It's like pointing out the Fox lies.
Right, and how to get reliable sources from it when it might be just smears of a rival, it's kind of hard to tell. I think really, when we talk about, when I was first starting this, people would tell me all the time, like, well, be careful. What if you're using like a William Randolph Hearst paper? And like, well, for one thing, you're not going to accidentally use a William Randolph Hearst paper. It's going to be pretty apparent, partly because every third article is going to be about William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper baron. And also, They tended towards sensational stories, but sure. The reputation they have that you couldn't rely on them, they just made stuff up all the time, comes more from the smears from his rivals than from actual reality.
Okay.
And they were certainly focused on sensational stories, but they didn't necessarily change them around to get them sensational, at least not more than other papers did. So he decided, let's get one going in Chicago. They bought out they hired the Chicago Tribune circulation manager who brought all of his newspaper sluggers with him. And pretty soon this was going to change the face. Well, the real difference between a Hearst paper and the others was substance. And it was a lot of the stuff that the Chicago Journal was already doing, but they added much flashier graphics, much bigger headlines. Like papers in 1905, a lot of the papers were still like 6 columns, all the same length, okay. No banner headlines or anything, just like 1 headline, 2 headlines, 3 headlines, 4 headlines. And then suddenly here comes the Chicago American, which has these... somebody once described their headlines to like a woman running down the street with her throat cut.
Jeez.
It's very, lurid headlines, big screaming fonts. Sometimes they break out red ink for the fonts. And usually this would be like if it was a red letter day. It was like I also found like a red font for like Lincoln's birthday celebrated for one of them.
Okay.
Whatever they felt like they need to liven things up, they could break out like the bubble letter fonts or the red ink. And really the difference is just in style more than anything else. But but they did love a good sensational story, and the Hoch story was absolutely perfect for him. Now the guy who ran the city editor at the time later wrote a memoir, and he said that what happened was one day he was sitting there in his office and going over the burial permits and the marriage permits, as he always did, to see if there was a good story, and saw this name John Hoch appearing on both of the lists.
Okay.
And, he said the name didn't suggest any particular romance, but he said that he had somebody go down there and check this out, see if there's anything weird in this story, and stumbled into this whole thing. Now, my guess is it's probably not exactly the way it happened. He probably got tipped off from a coroner's deputy or something. So one of the ways that they got news was they had a lot of people on retainer. Like if the Congress Hotel switchboard operators were always had a line on good stories. The police would have lines on good stories. Coroner's deputies, cab drivers, anybody who might pick up on a good story, they could go to the American with the Scoop and they'd get a box of chocolate or a couple of bucks or something. So they had like a whole network of people. It's a very good chance that he would have gotten tipped off by, my guess would be like a coroner's deputy or something. But in any case, they sent a reporter out to go talk to this Emily Fisher person. And at that point, I don't imagine they even would have known that Hoch had disappeared. Okay. They just kind of showed up, and she would have filled them in very broken English, saying, my sister's dead, he married me, my friends say that he killed the sister, and now he's disappeared.
With her money.
Yeah, with her money.
And the money that he'd sold from his sister, which he had promised to her, possibly.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So by that afternoon, and this was already on the front page of at least 4 papers. We talk about the 24-hour news cycle now. Back then, they were able to work remarkably fast. There was a couple hours of a gap, but like the American could print out a new edition every 45 minutes or an hour or so. Okay. So I could hear the newsies going extra, because there was literally an extra edition beyond the one that came out at 3, the one that came out at 5. Then there was the sporting edition when the sports scores came out. And trying to find like a timetable for when each of these things would come out was something I really just couldn't do. the inner workings of newspapers and how it worked to buy a newspaper and what you would expect in a newspaper back then is just not really that well documented. I had to piece a lot of this stuff together, but it was fun work. So I'll just kind of go through the different papers as of that day. The Journal, which used to be the really big sensationalist paper, is got a photo on the front page of Tsar Nicholas, who was at the center of murder plots and conspiracies. Then there's another headline: "Canal Body Gives Away Fortunes," and "Gamblers' Spies Baffle Raiders." Then down to the far right of the Home edition is this one column: "Wife Dead 2 Days, Man Weds Sister." Police suspect John Hoch, who has disappeared with $750 of bride's money, of murder. Wed twice in 1 month. Coroner exhumes body for purpose of investigating whether poison was administered. So it's a whole story on the front page of the Journal. So that's the Journal. There was also the Chicago Post, which had this headline. It was also, there's 7 different headlines on the front page. And headline number 5 is "Death in a Mystery." Man weds woman, she dies, then he marries sister and disappears. Vacant house a feature. Money also said to be missing by second wife, who stirs police. So it could be that she called the cops and the cops tipped off the newspapers as well.
Right.
So in the Post, there is also the Chicago Daily News, which has it kind of buried down at the bottom. But it's just a little thing: gets brides, cash, and goes. It's next to all of the sports scores and stuff. Right. But then you've got the Chicago American, which has, well, just in their sporting edition, there were several of them. I'll turn this so you can see it. Okay. Police demand to dig up bride's dead, bride's 9 days buried body. Was she killed? If so, by whose hand? There's a big picture of Emily, probably the picture of herself that she'd given to Johann and Marie as a wedding present. There's a picture of Marie that looks like an older one with her hair very severely parted. She looks like a school marm in this shot, with a little... underneath her it says Mrs. Marie Hoch, parentheses, dead. Oh, next to the big picture of Emily, it's Mrs. Johann Hoch, number 2, deserted. So already, within about 5 hours of the story breaking, they've got this on the street with a big picture of Emily, a big banner headline, and not only is it that they don't really go right with the fact that he's married the sister either. Their big thing is the police demand to dig up bride's 9 days buried body.
Dig bride's body.
Yeah,
it looks like
dig bride's body is what you'd see from a distance if a newsie was just like waving this is dig bride's body. Mm-hmm. Wow. It's amazing it took so long for newspapers to figure out that attractive front pages helped sell papers. That was one thing Hearst really, really brought into the forefront. So all of a sudden, there's this story that this guy has married a woman and deserted her after having married her sister, who is mysteriously dead. And the whole thing is severe enough that already the police are saying, we are going to dig this body back up and test it for poison. And the Chicago American has already interviewed Emily. I don't know how they interviewed her exactly. I don't know. They must have had somebody speaking German on staff who could translate.
I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the police kind of notoriously didn't have people to translate in a lot of cases. They'd round up some Italian guys that they thought might have murdered somebody, and they'd be like one person on the staff who could speak any Italian to put them in the sweat box. Huh. So there's a lot of cases back through the 19th century. It's like, well, maybe they confessed, but they couldn't have read what they were signing. You didn't know what they were saying. Ugh. A lot of stories like that going back. So already a couple of the papers have little interviews, like they've interviewed like Gussie, the nurse who lived there, but the Chicago American has already interviewed Marie. They've interviewed the other sister who's still alive. They've interviewed the nurse. They've interviewed the doctor, and the doctor was very surprised. The doctor who'd been attending to Marie said, "Oh, he was the most thoughtful and considerate husband you ever saw." And I think it was Bertha, the other sister who was still alive, just said, "Well, he was fascinating." And that's a word that they would use about him quite a lot, that he was fascinating.
Okay.
But newspapers right away figured out this is a story. This is, and at this point they started to get hints that he might have murdered and deserted other people as well. That started coming in over the course of the next couple of days. People started saying, wait a minute, that's the guy that sounds like the guy that I married. Or they didn't have a picture of him yet to go with. They didn't realize that they'd published a picture of him in the Daily News when he was operating under a different name just about 5 years before. So it was 3 or 4 days before anybody had a photograph of him published. But during that time, a lot of people were coming forth, like Anna Hendricks, who we talked about, who had married about a year or so then. Showed up at the Union Avenue house that Hoch had been renting and said, oh, those definitely have to be his shoes. They're really big. He had this problem with bunions. And that was like a light bulb to the police. Like, okay, we've kept that detail out of the paper. If she knows he had really big feet and some kind of problem with his feet, this is probably one of his actual wives. So they were starting to piece things together now. And it was not lost on any of them, not the police, not the reporters, nobody, that this cottage on Union Avenue was right next to the H.H. Holmes murder castle. Now, the newspapers, Hearst had not been operating in Chicago yet during the H.H. Holmes story. He had a paper just out in San Francisco, and they were digging up the murder castle. And the San Francisco paper's coverage is pretty much the same as other far-flung papers at the time. But later on, Hearst would be one of the two people who paid Holmes for a confession. They knew that this kind of story sold papers. So that's one other angle, is like, why was he living so close to this building at 701 63rd? Then Anna Hendricks even told the police, well, he pointed up at that building and told me that he owned it. So within a couple of days of this, newspapers are saying this could be another H.H. Holmes case, and Inspector Shippey is already saying he worked as the janitor in that building. I believe that he got he learned all of his skills from the school of H.H. Holmes.
Oh boy.
Working in a basement of that place. It was very much jumping the gun on Shippey's part.
Yeah, but that's the kind of thing that take hold for sure.
It's the kind of thing that newspapers loved.
Sure.
And the police always liked playing connect the dots with criminals as well, so it wasn't exclusively the police. But right away, Shippey was like taking in every story he could come up with and say, I believe that last unidentified victim of the Iroquois Theater fire might have been a Hoch victim.
What?
Where the hell he even got this, I have no idea. But Shippey was not mentally well. Within a few years, this would derail his career. I believe it may have been syphilis. There was a case a few years later. Well, right before this, there had been a case where there had been a murder and Shippey had rented a horse thinking the horse could lead him to where the killer was. He had set up a dead body inside of a mausoleum and brought suspects in hoping one would be scared into confessing. And a few years after this, a guy named Lazarus Averbach knocked on his door in the middle of the night. He had like a blank sheet of paper. It was a custom in the old country that if you traveled, you should have a letter from the chief of police.
Right.
But we don't really know what Lazarus Averbach wanted. All we know is Shippey thought, hey, he looks Jewish, he must be an anarchist, and shot him to death.
Oh my God!
And only Shippey could ask any questions at the inquest, so they quickly ruled that it was self-defense. But he never served another day in uniform after that. A couple of years later, he was in an asylum, and then a couple of years after that, he was dead. But I think at the time of the Johann Hoch case, he's already exhibiting some of those symptoms with some of the wilder stuff that he comes up with. And later on, he'll at one of the inquests, he'll have a whole list. Well, here's Hoch's confession. I've got it right here. It's several pages, and Hoch would later say, all I gave him was a list of cities that I lived in. He kind of filled in the rest for himself, which is somewhere in between the work of a guy who's not mentally well and also just kind of how the police worked at the time. For them to do false confessions and writing up the confession all by themselves and then getting the guy drunk and say, here's your alibi statement, just sign here, without them realizing they're signing a confession, was the sort of thing that was just known to happen.
Well,
so Shippey is
still happening. But
yeah. Yeah. It's difficult not to compare to what's going on in Broadview right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, there was a case in particular, the one that I compared to Broadview. There was a guy named Buff Higgins who was arrested in a possible murder case. And according to Judge Goggin, they threw him in the cell and starved him for a few days. Then at the end of it, they gave him, hey, you seem like you need a drink. Do you want some whiskey?
Oh, wow.
And they gave him like a whole bottle of whiskey, got him really drunk, then put his paper in front of him and say, well, here's your alibi statement. Just sign this and you'll be okay. And really it was a confession, but he was not only illiterate, but also drunk off his ass by then, so he had no idea what he was signing other than what they told him, but it was on the basis of him signing that they hanged him.
Oh my God! Wow.
And that's just one of so many stories like that. The difference is that Hoch had become such a media sensation that the reporters were going to be watching their every move.
Okay.
They were never able to really put him in the sweatbox the way that they did with some other people. They would eventually, well, it's a whole other episode really. But all of a sudden they realize that they've got this big story on their hands. It's the kind of thing that could make a career for a reporter. It's the kind of thing that could make a career for a police officer. It's the kind of thing that could make a career for a lawyer. So Hoch suddenly becomes a sensation. This also shines a light on just how many matrimonial scams there are out there. And day after day, more and more stories start pouring in of like, who was this guy? How many people is he married? And most of the stories that get reported, some of them still turn up in like Wikipedia articles and web pages about him. And they got debunked very quickly. As I said, they would identify about 55 different people that he was accused of marrying. I'd say about 25 of those are probably correct. But who knows how many others there are. I found a couple of the people I found the paperwork on with the parents' names and everything were never mentioned at the time. A couple of them just fell completely through the cracks. So who knows how many others there are.
Right,
that I just
because
didn't
you've
find.
got other cities involved.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of like 3-month periods where I don't know where you would have been. But so this is where we are now. We'll probably in the next few episodes we've got to talk about. There's one particular reporter that I just love talking about, Evelyn Campbell, who worked for Hearst. Hearst was very good about having women reporters. He even gave them individual bylines, which most reporters didn't get at the time. So he figured women reporters bring in women readers.
Smart.
And yeah, it was just good business. So we'll have to talk about her. We'll have to talk about Hoch being eventually captured. And then what Hoch decided to do when he was captured was just go on a charm offensive. Now, the way that we remember him now is this goofball serial killer, and really that didn't start until after he was arrested. He decided his best chance was to be funny and charming. And so, but we're moving right along here. So everybody, thanks again for joining us. We're getting back on track now. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours.
And I'm Patty Vasquez, WCPT Radio. Listen to me Monday through Friday.
Yeah, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m., 8:20 a.m.,
Yep.
mountain range to mountain. How far does the range on that one go? It's like all over the Midwest, really.
It's a lot of the Midwest. We're also in Seattle on KKNW 1150 and KTNF AM 950 in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Plus tune in anywhere in the
Awesome. Yeah, and, tune in this coming Friday. I'm going to be swinging by. All right, so thanks, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours and Tomb Snoopers, telling you all to keep on snooping. As always, there's lots more data, including all the stuff we've talked about today, over at patreon.com/tombsnoopers, plus early access and a whole lot more.